Good morning. This has been fun for the last day and a half or so, being here and hearing some inspiring stories. My name is Deborah Newman. My Twitter handle is @DebNewman. And I'd say the title of the story I'm going to tell, it's what Jeff calls the journey story, is called What Doesn't Kill You Makes You Stronger, which people have talked about. Kelly Clarkson's song, actually inspired by Nietzsche, whose famous quote is, "That which doesn't kill us makes us stronger." So I was inspired yesterday by Jeff when he described his reasons for sort of going public and sharing his personal journey on Facebook. I've not done that. In fact, this is the first time I'm starting to cry.
We love you.
Thank you. This is the first time that I'm telling this story in public. So I'm here to tell you about a scuba diving accident that I had 11 years ago that caused a spinal cord injury at the T7 level of my spinal cord, which is right about here, like the middle of your back, that resulted in my being paralyzed at the time, 100% paralyzed from the middle of my back to my toes. So the background for a second. In 1991, I quit smoking cold turkey after 25 years of smoking a pack and a half a day of Marlboros. And it was one of the hardest things I've ever done. But I decided to do it by getting my scuba diving certification and quitting smoking at the same time, going to Grand Cayman, and I figured if I was on a boat, in the water, in the sun, and stuff every day, that I wouldn't feel so compelled to want a cigarette. And actually, that kind of worked. I went through, once you get through that first week of not smoking, the worst part of it's over. And I managed to do that partly by spending a lot of time in the water. I got certified, and I loved it so much that I started diving all over the world. I was all over the Caribbean. I've been to Grand Cayman multiple times, the Bahamas, St. Lucia, Honduras, Turks and Caicos, even Cuba, all over the world, the Red Sea, off the coast of Africa and Zanzibar, in the Aegean Sea, in Turkey, in Bodrum, Turkey, in California and Catalina Island. I'd say over a period of about 11 years, I did about 350 to 400 dives. I got my advanced certification along the way. I got into underwater photography. I was getting good at it, taking some fabulous pictures. This was actually a picture that my boyfriend took of me at Stingray City in Grand Cayman, where you're actually only about 15 feet deep, so there's no real risk here. But that was like one of my more fun experiences. So in 2001, I got fired from a job, and I decided to pivot, I hate that word, but we'll use it, in my career, and go to law school. And I hadn't been in school in a really long time. I graduated from college in 1973, so it had been almost 30 years since I'd been like sitting in a classroom. So I took the LSATs on a whim. And in 2002, in the winter, I wrote all my essays, I did my applications, I got my letters of recommendations, and my plan was actually to marry my background in the music business, which I'd been in for almost 30 years, with learning about copyright and digital media, which is actually what I do now. So I didn't do so well on my LSATs. I took them a second time, and I got rejected by NYU and Columbia, which made me really depressed. But I still had a couple of schools left that I had applied to that were more second-tier schools. And I got really sick of waiting every day for that mail to arrive and race downstairs to the lobby and open it up only to find my rejection letters. So I decided to take a short trip. In case I got into law school, I wasn't going to have a lot of time to go diving, so I went for 4 days to the island of Grenada, which is all the way down in the southern part of the Caribbean, almost near South America. The Grenadines is named after Grenada. And I took all my camera gear with me. And on the morning of my second day, I was diving with a group of 6 divers whom I didn't know. I was alone, and a dive instructor, and it was what was called a guided dive, so we all followed the instructor in a line, no buddy system with everybody going off on their own. We did the exact same dive. We did an 85-foot wreck dive, which isn't actually that deep, even though it sounds it, with a long, slow ascent through the reefs, the coral reefs, up to under the boat, where you do what's called a safety stop for 3 minutes at 15 feet, and then get back up on the boat. Nothing radical about this dive. And we were all on dive computers, so you could actually see the profile of the dive. If we were coming up too fast, you would know it because the computer would beep, so that wasn't the case. So I came up to the surface with my camera gear, pulled myself up the ladder onto the boat. Everything was fine, or so I thought. And then my body started to go through a series of wacky changes. So I was nauseous. I thought I had to throw up. I couldn't throw up. My skin got to be incredibly hypersensitive, that kind of feeling that you have if you have 103 fever and it hurts to the touch. So my whole body was tingling, feverish, disoriented, and I knew something was wrong. So I sat down and I decided I would sit out the second dive, even though everybody thought, oh, you just pinched a nerve or something. And I knew something was wrong. And when I went to take off, I said, I'm sitting it out. I went to take off my wetsuit. I leaned over to lift my right foot to take off my neoprene bootie, and my right leg wouldn't move. And then my left leg wouldn't move. So both legs went, and then I kind of realized that these were the symptoms of severe decompression sickness, which I'll talk about in a second, but most people think of it as the bends. The bends is actually a euphemism for what happens when the nitrogen in your body, when you dive and you go down, nitrogen actually builds up in your tissues. And when you come back up, and that's why you come back up slowly, it has to be reabsorbed in small, tiny little bubbles back into the bloodstream. And occasionally, and generally it's from coming up too fast, but in my case it's what they call an unexplained hit, a bubble gets trapped. Often it can be in a joint, which is what most people think of as the bends. It's usually resolved fairly easily, an elbow or a knee. But in some cases, the bubble will travel and damage the central nervous system. It can go to your brain. You can have an air embolism and die. In my case, it got trapped at a place that supplies the oxygen. It's called a vascular insult or injury to the spine, where the oxygen, the spinal cord is deprived of oxygen, and it can't survive without oxygen. So it dies at that point, and everything below it dies. And that's actually what happened. And you know, I was trained enough to ask for oxygen on the boat, which every good dive operation has, and thankfully they had a canister, which I promptly finished. But it didn't really sink into me that I had a spinal cord injury and that it was possible that I'd never walk again. So the boat raced back to shore. The crew dragged me off by my arm, raced me to the hospital in Grenada. One of the things that happens when you're paralyzed, not to be too graphic about it, but when you dive, you come up and all you want to do is pee. You dive, you pee in your wetsuit, you know, everybody pees underwater, you want to pee. And I had to pee really badly, and nothing would come out. And that's when it occurred to me, your bladder is paralyzed. So the hospital first catheterized me, and then the dive operation called DAN. What's DAN? Who's DAN? DAN is an organization called the Divers Alert Network. And if you dive even once a year, you join DAN. You have to. They saved my life. It's a nonprofit group that's based at the Duke Medical School in North Carolina. They are the only organization outside of the Navy which studies the physiology of diving, dive medicine. There's a host of doctors there that are incredible that practice dive medicine. They also research dive accidents, the physiology of diving around the world, and they have an insurance plan. And the insurance plan, no matter where you are in the world, they take over. So I was medevaced by a special kind of Learjet to Barbados, where there's a hyperbaric oxygen chamber. That's one vision image of it, and that is what it looks like when you are thrown inside of it. And I spent 12 days for 7 hours a day inside this chamber undergoing oxygen recompression therapy. And during that time, you have a lot of time to think. You have a lot of time to be depressed, to get angry, to cry a lot, to try to understand what happened. Why me? Nobody else on this dive had any symptoms or had a problem. But what happens is, at least for me, my fighting instinct took over. And you do what you do to have to emotionally survive. You figure out what you have to think about so that you don't crawl into this depression. I wiggled my toes when I was able to. I struggled to shift my position. You're in there for a really long time, and you're lying pretty much flat on your back. So I got a little better. So every day I got better. And by the end of 12 days, I was actually out of a wheelchair or making the transfer and walking with a walker. like this, a little bit at a time. And they realized I wasn't going to get any better. Then they arranged to bring me back to New York with oxygen, with the person on the plane administering oxygen canisters on American. And I entered Mount Sinai Hospital, where there's an amazing spinal cord wing run by a famous spinal cord doctor named Dr. Ragnarsson. I was in this wing with quadriplegics and paraplegics, people who truly would never walk again. And I learned rehab. I went into rehab and I learned how to walk and how to dress myself and how to get in and out of a car. And while this was all going on, my boyfriend brought me my mail, and lo and behold, I got into law school. I never thought I'd be able to do it. So I sent them my check for $300, and I worked my ass off that summer. And by the end of the summer, I entered New York Law School and went 3 years full-time, and now I'm an attorney. Thank you. I want to say one thing. I know it's time for me to finish here, but first of all, I had a great role model. My mother had MS for 40 years, and she started a career after she was diagnosed with MS, became a radio disc jockey, a music critic, and the host of her own television show in South Florida, where I grew up. But I also am very now conscious of people's perceptions of those with disabilities. And it's very interesting. I haven't really talked about this, but when I meet people for the first time, or I'm having a business meeting or an interview, and they see the cane and they automatically think, oh, she's an old person with a disability. And then you say, it's a sports injury. You say what happens, and their perceptions change. And I don't understand, and I think we have to think about, why is it more acceptable to have a sports injury than a degenerative or a congenital disease? I think our whole perception of people with disabilities has to change. That's a topic for another discussion, but I see people on the buses and canes and wheelchairs, and now I realize what they go through just to go out and lead a life and get on the bus on that wheelchair and have the driver get you on and get you off. It's demoralizing, but you learn to live with it, and you can never be prepared for what happens. I'd say the other theme of my speech is the life is uncertain, eat dessert first theme. Yeah. And that's my story. Thank you.